RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Today's episode is sponsored by Fizz Hydration Tablets, the convenient way to get your hydration needs, vitamins and minerals covered in one easy tablet. To get a discount of 20%, use the code SPORT20 at their checkout. Yes, welcome back to episode 64 of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name's Jamie Bain, and today I interview Jason T from Durban University. Jason's got heaps of experience in rugby in the UK and South Africa, and we talk a lot about the chronic acute workload ratio and some of the pitfalls, and then he kind of suggests how to approach return to play following COVID-19. So it's tons of other stuff as well. I'm really interested about his work on multidisciplinary teams, and I'm sure you'll get tons from it. So give it a listen and let us know what you think. Hi Jason, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. It's great to have you on. Let's start by you telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning, and who you've worked with.
Jamie, first of all, thanks very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be on here. So I guess I started out like many guys do, in that I wasn't so sure what I wanted to do after school, and I ended up enrolling for a sports science degree because it had the word sport in the title. And so I kind of muddled my way through that, picking up some odd jobs coaching here and there. But really my start in strength and conditioning was I was working at a school in Johannesburg, King Edward VII School, and they built a fantastic new facility. The headmaster was a bit of a visionary at the time, and they had this brilliant gym, but they hadn't hired any staff for it really. So it ended up falling to me because they were like, oh, well, you should probably know something about this. And it was just a really brilliant opportunity. I spent 8 years there, and it was an opportunity with a blank slate to just really sort of learn what to do in a weight room. And it worked out really well. We got lots of great improvements. The sportsmen at the school did well as a result, and it started leading to other opportunities for me. I guess because our sportsmen were doing well, I sort of got a bit of a reputation. So on the back of that, I was invited to be the strength and conditioning coach for Wits University Rugby Club, who plays in the Varsity Cup in South Africa, which is, I mean, it's an amateur competition, but many of the players from that walk straight into professional contracts after that. And I also got the opportunity to join the Golden Lions as a sports scientist PhD student working with their GPS monitoring. So yeah, that gave me a few diverse opportunities, and I was constantly coaching schoolboys also. And then at the end of my PhD, I was very fortunate to get the opportunity to go to Leeds Beckett University, not as a student this time, but as a lecturer. And I taught on the sports coaching course there, teaching some of their strength and conditioning modules. And then, the UK industry is just so big, and it was so cool. So many opportunities presented themselves. So while I was there, I coached the university second rugby side as a technical tactical coach rather than an S&C coach. I spent a year working with the Leeds Rhinos women's team in the first year of the Women's Super League. And I also hooked up with the Denmark Sevens rugby team, and I spent two seasons with them as their strength and conditioning coach. So that pretty much brings us up to today.
Yeah, cool. Tons of experience in rugby, and interesting. I didn't know that you worked as a technical tactical rugby coach as well. It'll be interesting. We're going to talk later about kind of multidisciplinary teams, and I imagine that experience will help you in that regard. But first, I want to strike while the iron's hot, and I recently read your article about the pitfalls of the acute chronic workload ratio. the acute chronic workload ratio, science or religion. Could you kind of expand on kind of the key points from that article and your opinion on it, and perhaps how we should do things or how we should look at things?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for getting hold of me on the back of that. What I want to just start out by saying is, this is by no means me having a pop at any of the researchers that have worked on the acute chronic load. I know how difficult research is. And in fact, I've met Tim Gabbett before, and he's a real stand-up bloke who'd be a real credit to any organization he's working with. That article that I wrote was more a case of me as a practitioner trying to make sense of all of the information that's out there on this topic. And I guess what's happened is, if you think about it, the acute chronic training load workload ratio was sensational. I remember being at the training load conference at Aspire in Qatar, and it was just all anyone in sports science was talking about, and we just so quickly and so rapidly jumped on this idea. And the reason why I think we all did that was that, forget what the research said and the statistics. It was just such a sticky concept, and it was such a easy to digest concept. I think that what it did was it created this kind of bridge between sports scientists and technical tactical coaches, where the sports scientist was in the past really the training load police and saying, oh, don't do that, be careful of that, try and do a little bit less of that. And that doesn't endear them to coaches at all, because coaches understand that they've got to push their athletes. So the acute chronic ratio idea gave us this tool to be able to communicate and say, no, look, we're not saying that you mustn't do a lot, but let's think about what we need to do and think about how we can get to those training loads safely and progressively. And it really, I think, it brought sports scientists to the table, because they suddenly had something more to offer than cautionary tales. They had a method of helping you ensure your performance. So, I mean, fast forward to today, and despite the appealingness, I guess, of the concept, what's starting to happen is that researchers are probably just taking more time and thinking more deeply about it. Maybe some of the initial science was a bit rough and ready, and now that we're unpacking it and more people are interested in it, and it's getting scrutinized more closely, some of the assumptions and some of the methods underpinning the acute chronic ratio are not holding up to that further inspection. So, now we've got the situation where we've got a really, really popular idea that helps as a heuristic. It's useful for us because we can think about a structure to our training to help us get from point A to point B. But the actual statistical underpinnings of it are not probably there the way that we thought that they were.
Yeah, and I think we've had Tim Gabbett on as a guest on the podcast, and he'd say as well that, and I'm sure he has said that even looking at the acute chronic workload ratio, it just suggested that there was more risk, and sometimes you've got to kind of push the risk if you want to push the envelope of athletes' performance. He kind of said you've got to be aware of it. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't push it, but it was, like you say, it was used to kind of be a bit more pragmatic with prescription rather than having these big spikes in training load. And I guess also, like I say, it's a small bit of research in a very vast vast loads of data on this type of stuff, and it's still early days in sports science. So tons of stuff is going to develop over time and change how we think about things like that. So good points. Now we spoke off air about this and kind of the situation we find ourselves with COVID-19, and players have been in isolation, training at home, and slowly different countries are slowly getting back to sport. What are the ways you suggest to prescribe training to reduce injuries and improve performance, and also in this environment to prevent injuries coming back?
Yeah, so thinking back to that acute chronic ratio and why it's so appealing is it just really says that you've got to earn the right to train hard, and statistical backing for that or not, that's a fairly sound strength and conditioning principle. Long before the acute chronic workload, we were talking about progressive overload, and that is a very sound training principle. So what we understand is that we've got to increase training loads in order to get adaptation, but we also understand that those increases can't be too big, or else we're gonna risk injury. And it's nice to be able to quantify that, but what we're learning is because injuries are so complex and so multifactorial, it's difficult to quantify that. So that brings us back to, well, what do you do if you're a practitioner? And really practitioners need to use their professional expertise and judgment. So for anyone who's now planning, how do we return from COVID-19, you're not starting from scratch. You've got plenty of experiences of bringing players back after an off season where they've potentially done nothing for a period of time. You've got plenty of experience probably starting training with people who've never trained seriously before, and you've got some ideas about how to start with them and progress them safely. So as much as people think that we're in unfamiliar territory, it's not that unfamiliar if we just start applying the things that we know. So in order to work out how to return players to training safely, what we've got to work out is what have they been doing over the past couple of weeks while they've been in lockdown, and what do you need them to do? What are the demands of the game? So how do you transition them between that gap? And that's going to depend on a conversation with those athletes. It depends on the level you're working with. If you've got the a couple of academy under 15s, there's maybe a chance that they've done nothing at all. And as long as they're honest about that, you can work with that. If you're working with professional athletes, chances are that they've maintained some sort of training load. It probably isn't going to be exactly what they would have done if they were in your system, but you can, they're professionals. They should be doing 8, 9, 10 hours of training a week, even if that is just hitting the roads and going out and running, or body weight, things like that. So it's not like they're going to come off zero training load. The important thing is to understand is what is the difference between what they were doing and what they need to do. And you can probably work out that they maybe not spent a lot of time under the bar recently, so maximal strength is probably suffering, and high power, high performance capacities, things like acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, maximal velocity. Those are the things that even if you've got the will, it's quite hard to do on your own at home. You probably lack the motivation to really go 100%. So when you're returning to training, it's my biggest worry would be thinking about those things and thinking, okay, well, how do we get back to maximum velocity safely? How do we add in loads of changes of direction and agility work safely, rather than big concerns about, well, how many hours are we spending training in a week? Does that resonate?
Yeah, I think you're right. You've got to look at where the athlete currently is in terms of what they've been doing, and what you want to build them up to perform. What are the demands of your training environment, and ultimately when they get to games, and kind of bridging that gap. And that's kind of what you do anyway. Like you said, as you come back from the off season and you start your pre-season, very rarely do you start with a really tough, intense session that very first day back pre-season, because you've got to build up again. So yeah, it's very good point.
What I would just throw in there is a lot of the decisions, particularly in professional sport, are going to be taken away from the guys in charge, from strength and conditioning coaches, things like that. We'll be given a date when players are going to return, and we'll also be given a date when they're going to play their first match again. And it's probably not going to be as long as a full preseason. So there's going to be constraints there, and it's going to be a matter of going back to basic periodization models and saying, well, if I've only got 4 weeks to get from this point to this point, how do I do that? If it's 4 weeks, you could be forgiven for saying, well, we're going to start at 50% of that load and go at 10% increase per week or something like that. We're in uncharted territory, but those sorts of progressions are reasonable under the circumstances.
Yeah, definitely. And you've touched on there, and kind of pulling from your coaching background, you've talked before about how to integrate rugby training with physical preparation. What's your approach to it with your rugby players?
So I'm an acolyte, I suppose, certainly a fan of tactical periodization. I mentioned that we coached the Leeds Beckett second side. My co-coach over there, Mike Ashford, he and I wrote a paper on tactical periodization for rugby. So we fit squarely within that camp, in that we just think that's the best way to get guys ready for rugby is to put them into game situations where they are able to use those technical, tactical, and physical skills that they require to be successful in the game. It doesn't help us if we've got a massive big beast, but he can't catch and pass, or he can't get himself into the correct position to carry with any kind of angle or things like that. So sure, while physical is important for the game of rugby, it's also really important to be effective in the way that you're playing.
Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of actual training sessions, how do you combine, if you've got a physiological adaptation you want to get out of it, and then obviously a rugby element to it, how do you try and combine that working with coaches?
Yeah, so I mean, it's all about manipulating constraints. The tactical periodization idea is that you start off with the tactical outcome that you want to achieve. So this is where, I often make the analogy that, we can't train in a way that we go, okay, we're going to do our skills now, so let's go catch and pass and kick for a while. Now we're going to learn tactics, so the coach is going to show you some stuff on the whiteboard. Now we need to get fit, so let's go and run around the field for half an hour. Because that's just not the way we put it together in a game. So, the approach for me would be to go to the coach and say, right, coach, so what's the plan for this week, for today, for this session? What are you looking to achieve? And he'll go, we really need to work on our defense on the short side. Okay, great, coach. So aligned with that, what I would really like to get out of this session is some real good collision volume and some acceleration, deceleration exposure. So let me see your drill. Okay, that's great. That's probably gonna, maybe not work for us because the field's too big or too small. So can we change it like this? Can we maybe increase or decrease the player numbers? Can we work on the timings? Can we decide how long is the ball in play? How long are we going to rest for? And then, I use my physiological knowledge to manipulate that session so that he can still achieve his goals, but we can get the physical stress that we need to create adaptation.
Yeah, I really like it. It's a collaborative approach, and like you said, they get what they want out of it. But most coaches will want that good physical element of it as well. So it's I like the way you approach that. And this next question is one we ask all the guests on the podcast, and it's, what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
Yeah, I mean, I probably alluded to it earlier, but just obsession with size. granted, it's a collision game, and I accept that the more weight you take into a collision, the more likely you are to win that collision. But what I think so many people forget is it's also a game, and it's a skill game, and I just think that people neglect their running ability, they neglect agility, they neglect skills, and they think that they can become wonderful rugby players in the weight room. And unfortunately, you can't. It's the old story of the guy who looks like Tarzan but plays like Jane. If I would take a good rugby player that is smaller over a big beast, that's not a great player every day of the week.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very, very common one we hear. So I kind of alluded to it earlier. It's really important for a multidisciplinary approach to dealing with athletes. What have you found to be the most effective way to develop this in an organisation?
So again, this is something I've dabbled in research. So I suppose I've been a part of a couple of multidisciplinary teams, some that have been successful and some less so. And then I actually did a paper recently where we went into a very, very effective multidisciplinary team, and we interviewed all of the people who were part of it, and we asked them, how does it work? Why does it work? Things like that. And a couple of ththings emerged, which I suppose you could probably have guessed at, but it's always nice to have things confirmed with data. So for me, there's the first thing is clarity of vision. And this gets into that stuff where the club says, well, what are we about? What are our goals? Things like that. And often that seems quite highfalutin, and you go, well, that's great. Now you got something to write on a piece of paper and put over the doorway. But how does that affect my day to day? But the truth is, it actually really does affect your day to day, because if you aren't clear on, are we a player development environment, or are we a win at all costs environment? You can get quite confused, because that knowledge might affect, or probably does affect, the way you make certain decisions. So the first thing I'd say is that the multidisciplinary team needs to have a clear alignment in terms of their vision. And then the next two things we came across is, first of all, you've got to understand that multidisciplinary teams are inherently places where there's high levels of conflict. And that's because you've got people with different backgrounds and different trainings, where we essentially got people who all have different tools. So, if you call me and you say, okay, well, we've got an injury problem, what should we do about it? I'll go, well, we should lift more. Let's get stronger, because strength reduces injuries. But if you ask the physiotherapist, he might have quite a different opinion on that. He might feel like we got to do more rehabilitation exercises or something like that. So the point is, these different viewpoints can lead to conflict. And so the idea of psychological safety is to be able to have a place where you can say something that is completely opposite to what the other person is saying, and I suppose have healthy debate about it, but ultimately know that when that discussion's finished, or when the decision's been made, whatever you said in that conversation is not going to be held against you, and is not going to be brought up later or spoken about to someone else. It's all got to be open and honest, and in the spirit of constructive criticism, open discussion, things like that, which is a very difficult thing to do. But in environments where you've got that, it's particularly effective. And once you've got that idea, then you are able to get into a place where you can look for continuous improvement, because you can get healthy feedback. You can go to your colleagues and your co-workers and your other MDT members and say, well, what do you think of this? Is this a good idea? And you're going to get an honest answer, rather than an answer that's not going to help you, but is going to make you feel better at the end of the day. And once you start pulling that curtain and start getting honest feedback, then your improvements start becoming incremental. So those for me are the underpinning things. You've got to have alignment and vision. You've got to have an environment of psychological safety, and then this attitude of continuous improvement. The things that go on top of that is that expertise is really, really useful. People who are really great at their job are going to be great in multidisciplinary teams. But what I learned from the research is that even if you are an expert, even if you're the most qualified person in the world, you also have to learn how to become an expert in the new environment, because every environment's different. Every environment's got its own idiosyncrasies and its own ways of doing things and its own language and its own ways of communication. So you've got to work out a way to immerse yourself in that and get all of this knowledge that you've got across in that environment. You've got to learn how to work with new people and convey those ideas effectively. And then the last thing I'd say about multidisciplinary teams is it takes time. Time is a hugely valuable resource. You need to be able to have time to sit together and talk and understand each other and be within each other's space. One of the hardest things in the world is to be a session coach who comes in for 2 1-hour sessions a week, and you arrive 5 minutes before your session and you leave 5 minutes after, because you're literally operating in a bubble. You've got no idea what's going on in the larger organization, and you only get the have to know messages rather than the opportunity to be part of conversations that determine the alignment in the whole program. So I suppose I've spat a whole lot of information at you there, but hopefully there's some take homes about how multidisciplinary teams can be effective.
Yeah, no, I've been scribbling some notes, so no, it's been great. What in terms of clarity of vision, I always loved that, and I think I've brought it up before. I don't know if you read a book by some British rowers. I think it's Does It Make the Boat Go Faster? And that was their question on every kind of every decision they made as a team. It was like, does it make the boat go faster? And if it didn't, they get rid of it. So they had that clarity of vision of whatever they did, it was to improve their performance. And on that, what role, or I guess, is that something that's kind of driven by the leaders, or do you find that the best results are when that clarity of vision's kind of come from the team as a group?
So, I mean, that's quite interesting, because that wasn't something I managed to work out from the research. Essentially, I think it can come around a few ways. I think that if you get a group of like-minded people together, it can just emerge. Multidisciplinary teams in sport, at least, or professional sport, are typically not that big. It's only 4, 5, maybe 6 people. So you could have a happening of chance where you just happen to get a really great team together. And I think that people can think back to times in their careers where you've gotten 3 or 4 guys that just vibe with each other, and that makes for a really easy working environment. I think you can do it by consensus or by choice, or the leaders within the group can say, listen guys, I think this is what we really need to do. Can we buy into that? I think that's a way to do it. And I think that in a lot of organizations, it's simply inherited. If you walk into Manchester United, I can't imagine that people are going to be messing around saying, well, you on day one of your job have an opportunity to talk about the vision. I think they're going to tell you exactly what the vision is, and they probably wouldn't have recruited you if you didn't fit into that vision. So yeah, I think there's a few different ways to get there, but whichever way you get there, I think it's a really important factor.
Yeah. No, I guess what you allude to is earlier in your answer is that all those different multidisciplinary teams are in different environments and have kind of developed. A part of it is you try to develop it, but some of it kind of happens naturally as well. I guess it's a very interesting topic. Now, you mentioned that research on multidisciplinary disciplinary teams. You're producing a lot of applied research. What would you recommend to people trying to improve this area of research? Because it's really important to get that applied stuff out there, and it's always interesting to see these different environments and how people are working.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to give just mention to a couple of guys that I worked with at Leeds Beckett here in Ben Jones and Kevin Till, because I just think that they are probably the masters of applied research. They've got PhD students working in professional sporting organisations all over Yorkshire, and they are producing stuff that is really impactful. And yeah, so I'm going to just say unashamedly that I've learned a huge amount from them. And what Ben always says, which I think is probably the most important thing, is make sure that your research is useful, not interesting. So, if you give a person a GPS monitor or a heart rate monitor or a gym aware or something like that, you can collect data, and once you've got data, you can find the patterns. But this is probably something that happened to me at the end of my PhD. I spent 2 years with GPS units strapped to the back of rugby players, and the coaches asked me about it at the end. And I managed to talk for about half an hour, and they went, "Oh, okay, that's great. So the take home message is this," and then they were done. And I thought, gee, well, that's amazing. That's 2 years worth of work that's been condensed into a 20-minute conversation, and now they know what I know. So, the point is you can't just give people more information. You got to try and solve problems for them. So anyone who is looking to do an applied research project, I would start with talking to the people in the environment and find out what the performance problems are that they are struggling with or wrestling with at the moment, or things that they would like the answer to, and then try and build your research projects around that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I've got to say that's something that Dan Tobin was very good at, who I worked with at Gloucester, and he did tons at Leinster and kind of looked at it for like internal research within his club was, what are our problems that we're trying to solve, or kind of training techniques that we want to improve or get better results at, and then actually doing a study on that and doing it in their environment and seeing how that can actually, so you get some good performance improvements, plus you get more information about it, and it just keeps adding those bits of information to your kind of program as a whole. And it was really nice to be a part of that. But yeah, like obviously great to hear that those guys are doing a lot up in Yorkshire. I'm aware of both those guys, so it'd be good to get in touch with them and hear what they're doing. Again, another question we ask all the guests on the podcast is, what advice would you give to an up-and-coming strength coach?
Just get out there and coach. I'm teaching on the master's course at Leeds Beckett. We had a probably advanced masters in strength and conditioning or whatever it was called. And from year to year, we saw a massive difference. The first cohort we had was a lot of guys who were really, really keen on strength and conditioning and exceptionally book smart. But no one had put themselves out there or not no one, but few of them had put themselves out there and done internships and things like that. And it just, it was a real difficulty for them later on, because whether you got a master's or not, no one wants to hire a strength and conditioning coach with no experience. But also they were actually struggling to answer the applied questions because they just didn't have a frame of reference for those things. Fast forward a year later, and the message had gotten around that if you want to get out of this course and get a job, you need some experience. And the guys were out there and they were getting their hands dirty. And the quality of the discussion and the quality of the work that came out of those guys was massively improved. So yeah, the biggest thing is just get your hands dirty. It doesn't matter if you're training your auntie or your nephew. There's no substitute for time in the weight room and writing programs and trying to figure out how that all fits together.
Yeah, there's no substitute for experience, is there? And I always say, as soon as you can, whether it's other athletes or just general population, that the more people you coach, early in your career, the better. It's massive. And any books or resources you'd recommend, whether it's podcasts or online training courses or anything?
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a frequent question on a lot of podcasts, and I've got one that I haven't heard mentioned too often. Probably the book that really got me excited about strength and conditioning was Boyd Epley's Path to Athletic Power. And Boyd Epley was, I don't know if maybe I'm teaching you to suck eggs here, but he was one of the originators of the NSCA, and he started the Husker Power program at University of Nebraska.
His name rings a bell, but I hadn't heard of the book.
Yeah. So I mean, the book's just great. It's real easy to read. It's not particularly complicated. But the training programs within they work like a bomb. And I think for me, at that point, I'd been exposed to training programs. I knew my sets and reps and intensities and even some periodization. But this was the first time I'd seen a system that worked for athletes from their first year in university to their last, that progressed them all the way through, a system that was appropriate. They had plans for in-season, out-season, off-season. It was so easily communicated. Those programs there, they were working with a massive number of athletes, 500 athletes with probably 10 coaches. And I can imagine that everyone was absolutely clear on what needed to happen on the weight room floor every single day. So if the guys out there haven't read it, I think it's a hidden gem.
I know, definitely check that one out. Again, newish question to the podcast. What should I have asked you that I haven't?
Oh no, I don't think so. I think we've covered an absolute huge amount at the moment. So no, I'm all out.
And where can people learn more about you?
So I've been using my lockdown time to upskill. So I've learned to do a website in R, which I'm quite optimistic about. Oh. So probably the first place to get me is Jason CT. That's TEE at. Oh gosh, see, you can see I'm not practiced. It's www.jasonctee.co.za. So I'm on that. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter at JasonCT, and also on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to get hold of me, is one of those three.
Yeah, cool. And we'll share all the links to those in the show notes. It was great to kind of stumble onto that article of yours, and I'm sure there's tons more to come. Thanks for taking the time to talk about it with us and your career and experiences. It's been great chatting with you, and all the best for the future.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I was looking down the list of people you've had on the podcast earlier, and it's a fantastic group. So the privilege is all mine.
Oh, thanks, Jason. So some great insights there into how we can better use sports science. And like I said before, I love the stuff on the multidisciplinary teams. It's always stuff that we're working on in rugby to improve. So thank you, Jason, for that. It was great to talk to you, and all the best for the future. In the meantime, guys, please subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, or Spotify, whatever you use for podcasts. And of course, give us a 5-star review. Keep checking us out at rugbyrenegade.com and all the social media. And stay tuned. There are tons more podcasts. One of the benefits of lockdown has been stuck at home and just on Skype. So we've got tons more coming. So please subscribe.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.